Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. This is going to be part 2 of 3 June wrap-ups. I ended up reading, I think, 16 books in June, so part 1 is already out. I'll link that in the description. The second half of June, I ended up completing a lot of books. Some of those I had started even before June, and then I had a couple of audiobooks in there and a middle grade book. I ended up finishing 13 books in the second half of June, so I'm going to break that up into 2 wrap-ups. Look forward to the third June wrap-up in about a week or so. So today we're going to look at 5 books that I finished in the second half of June. The first I read with my husband, who lives in a rehab home. He has a traumatic brain injury, and we both love reading, and so one of our favorite pastimes is to read together. And we both really enjoyed reading The Martian by Andy Weir. Maybe we're the last people on earth to have read this, but we both really enjoyed this. I since watched the movie as well. This is also one of the Great American Read books now that I can check off my list. This was number 61 on the Great American Reads list. The Martian follows astronaut Mark Watney as he tries to survive on Mars after his crew, the Ares 3, have essentially left him for dead because they legitimately thought he was dead after a major dust storm came through the area where they were and caused them to abort their mission. Otherwise, they would all be stranded there. Mark is what they believe to be fatally wounded, but by kind of a fluke, he ends up surviving. The Ares 3 crew successfully escapes Mars, aborting the mission, and they are now aboard their ship, the Hermes, but Mark is now left alone to fend for himself on an uninhabitable planet. Fortunately for Watney, he is a botanist and an engineer, which turns out to be the perfect combination for survival on Mars. So he has to use his own intelligence, knowledge, and figure-it-outness along with the supplies that he has left over. He does have a dwelling, the Hab, that he can live with. He has the rover and some other equipment left behind from the mission. And using those, he has to be able to survive with food and water and atmosphere and feed himself for the foreseeable future. One of my favorite parts of this book was the amazing problem solving you would find. So using his scientific, engineering and botany knowledge and just base scientific knowledge, it's far above my head. He faces what seemed like a impossible situation, but through his problem solving ability is able to take one problem at a time and find a solution, which means his survival. And that is all mixed, and that could be really dry, but that's all mixed with his really sardonic humor and kind of self-deprecating, and there's a really good balance of wit and humor in with these really heavy science-filled sections that completely go over my head, but the way that it's explained, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Throughout the book, we do get snippets of what's going on back on Earth with NASA, and as they are discovering that he is alive and then trying to find a way to communicate with him or possibly develop a rescue mission to save him. My only criticism of the book is that there were multiple times where an acronym was used and never explained. For example, JPL. I don't believe JPL was ever, we never found out what JPL stands for. I figured it out when I watched the movie, but now I can't remember what it was. JPL, EVA, MMU, I think it was, or MMD, I can't remember. So these would be used in the context. You could figure out what it meant, but you were never explicitly told what those letters mean. This was an excellent portrayal of the lengths that humans will go to save another human. It really had me thinking about the Chilean miners who were trapped in the mine, and I can't remember how long it was that they were trapped, but I remember watching on the news and then being rescued and just thinking, like, this is an amazing event that's happening, and the lengths that NASA and other related organizations, even China in this case, get involved to save this one person. The amount of money that it's going to cost to save this one person doesn't seem to matter. And of course, there's going to be amazing, if they could successfully bring him back to Earth, there's going to be amazing knowledge that they're going to attain from having someone had lived on Mars for as long as he did, but they didn't think it was going to work. I love the sections on Earth where you have a palpable feeling of hope and despair of, can we save Mark Watney, and the collective worldwide bated breath during the rescue mission. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Last summer, I believe, I read Artemis, Weir's second book. Not a big hit with me. I want more like The Martian. The other book that I had started before June was Gullivers Travels by Jonathan Swift. Now, this, I would say, is one of those books where after finishing it, I am much more pleased with it after I finished with it than the enjoyment I actually had while reading it. So while there were moments of great enjoyment that I was really getting a kick out of what Swift was writing, there were times where it was a bit of a slog, probably because this was written in 1725, I believe, and published in 1726. But essentially, this is the essentially travel memoir of Lemuel Gulliver, who is a ship surgeon, and basically, like Tom Hanks, never travel with Lemuel Gulliver, because he ends up in a whole bevy of misadventures, and he keeps landing in being shipwrecked and landing in these otherwise unknown lands. And this is really a parody of human nature, and particularly of travel writing in the 18th century. So, as I did say that it wasn't always a great joy to read. There were some sections I felt that just kind of droned on, and to be honest, there were some parts that I skimmed a little bit, but there's so many references in here to things that we say today, and or that I think that authors today and in the past have referenced or taken inspiration from. One of the big ones, and this was one of my favorite sections of the book, is the last section, the term Yahoo. You know, that Yahoo just cut me off. Yahoo comes from this book. That was my favorite section of the book, my favorite land, basically, that he ended up on. The Yahoos are essentially the humans, basically, and the intelligent life on this land are actually horses. So I found that, and I looked up, is that the origin of Yahoo? And yes, Gulliver's Travels is the origin of Yahoo. There's also the French fantasy book, A Winter's Promise. I haven't read it, but I've heard about it, and there's like these floating, I can't remember what they're called, but it's basically like these floating lands, and I don't know whether the inspiration was taken from Gulliver's Travels, but there is an element of that on one of the lands that he discovers there. I also was thinking of, at the time that I was reading this book, because I read this over parts of 2 or 3 months, that I was reading, here it is, Jen Campbell's Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. And not that Jen actually took anything from this, but as I was reading both, I was thinking, how does one come up with something like as creative and kind of absurd of that? And so reading Jen's book, it was reminding me of elements of Gulliver's Travels, like, who would come up with that? But that's why I'm not a writer. I can't come up with that. So ultimately, I ended up giving Gulliver's Travels 3 stars. Again, it's one of those where I feel like I have greater enjoyment after the fact. I'm very glad that I have read this book now. And this is another book that I can check off my Great American Read list. This is number 75 on the Great American Reads list. And number 71 on the Great American Reads list is Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. I did read, I don't know if we finished it, but we at least started reading this book in 4th grade, where like the teacher reads to you. I remember sitting on the floor, teacher sitting in the chair, reading this. The only thing I remember is the premise of the book. So the premise is that, Brian, Our main character, I want to say he's like 11 or 12 or so. His parents are in the middle of a divorce, and it's during, I think it's summer vacation, and he is flying up to Canada to visit his father. And based on the remoteness of where he's going in Canada, he has to take like a small Cessna plane, and while they're in flight, the pilot has a heart attack. And the part that I specifically remember as a kid is that as he starts having chest pains and the symptoms of a heart attack, he keeps passing gas. So as a fourth grader, that's really what stuck in my mind, was the flatulent dying pilot. So Brian now has to successfully land the plane in order to survive, and as he does so, he successfully lands or kind of safely crashes the plane, and then now he's in the middle of nowhere all by himself. The only thing he has is the hatchet that is clipped to his belt that his mother gave him right before he left. So he now has to use the little bit of kind of survival knowledge that he has. It's kind of nice that there's a specific teacher that he keeps bringing up that, oh yeah, I remember Mr. whatever said this. And then he uses the knowledge he has, observation of the environment he's in, and then trial and error, figuring out, okay, well that didn't work, so let me try this. And he really puts all these things together in order to survive until that he can hopefully be rescued. I ended up giving Hatchet 4 stars, especially if you have a middle reader in your house. I think this would be an excellent book. This is a great example of how you can learn from your mistakes and continue to improve yourself. In Brian's case, this was for actual survival, but I could see as a teaching mechanism as a parent or as a teacher how you can apply this to all sorts of areas of life. Look at this color palette so far. That's kind of nice. It's going to change. Next up, we have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I'm so happy I finally got to this book. I ended up listening to this on audiobook. In this story, we follow the multi-species crew of the Wayfarer, a tunneling ship. Our main character is Rosemary Harper. She is a new member to the crew, and she has kind of a administrative assistant type of role on the ship. She is basically trying to make a new start. There's something in her past that she's trying to get away from, and she's trying to make a new start on this ship and with this crew, far away from her old life. In this book, Becky Chambers gives us a character-driven story that does not lack for plot, and she uses the multi-species element, because we have beings from all sorts of different planets throughout the galaxy, or maybe multiple galaxies, I suppose, really as an allegory for the diversity of humans, humanity, and our tendency towards ethnocentrism and egocentrism. This book is about friendship, family, diversity. It even looks at issues around artificial intelligence rights, which as we move into the future is kind of an interesting thing to think about. 5 stars for The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Last up for part 2 of the 3 June wrap-ups for this month is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Now, I'm not going to go into very much detail about this book because it's one of those kind of the less you know, the better. A catastrophic world event known as the Collapse occurred 15 years ago. Now we follow 5 main characters, both in multiple timelines in the past and in the present, kind of 15 years after the collapse, as they deal with surviving, essentially. We see how their stories connect, and as the story unfolds, we see the butterfly effect in motion. I highly recommend this. I gave this 4 stars. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was very enjoyable. So that does it for part 2 of 3 June wrap-ups. Please check out part 1, which will be linked below, and look forward to part 3, which I'll be posting soon. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I know a few of these are like mega hits, especially on BookTube. So let me know your thoughts on those. Thank you for watching. See you around the tubes.